Hello and welcome to Leaders of Europe, a new programme of political debate direct from Brussels. We'll be examining the key issues currently being tackled by Europe's leaders. And in this month's edition, the Middle East. The European Parliament has shelved a highly critical EU report on Israel's treatment of the Palestinians in East Jerusalem. So, how much influence does the Israeli government have in Brussels? The EU budget, 80% of it is unaccounted for. Who's responsible, and should the buck, or rather the euro, stop with national finance ministers? Then Cyprus. Is there now a real chance for a breakthrough in the island's 30-year dispute with Turkey? With me in the studio, I have our regular panel of 3 senior members of the European Parliament and a special guest. First up on the panel is Chris Davis. A draft EU report has sharply criticised the growth of Israeli neighbourhoods in East Jerusalem. It accused Israel of using its security barrier to seal off most of East Jerusalem and disconnect 230,000 Palestinians from the city. Israel says the barrier is a security measure, but the report says it's political. I quote, "Israel's main motivation is almost certainly demographic, to reduce the Palestinian population of Jerusalem." Strong stuff. But now we hear the report isn't going to be published at all. Chris Davis, the Lib Dems believe in freedom of speech. Why won't you publish the findings of your own Middle East experts?
Without any question, that report should be published. It goes against all the principles of openness and transparency on which the European Union is supposed to be based, and it's self-defeating. If we want to try and encourage reconciliation within the Middle East, we don't feed the impression that the West is on the side of Israel and doing down the Palestinians.
All right, fine words. What are you going to do about it?
Well, what we are doing about it as Liberal Democrats is calling for that report to be published, as are many other parliamentarians here, I have to say.
And if it's not?
Well, what can we do if it's not? I mean, we don't have the power over that. It's already out there. You've just quoted from it. It's on the website. The point is, though, has it been officially sanctioned? And it hasn't been, and that is wrong.
You going to vote with them on that?
I love voting with the Lib Dems on as much as I possibly can, and actually on this thing, and on a matter of transparency, absolutely. It's one of those strange things about this place. There's no reason to keep this secret. It is freely available. There are MEPs wandering around with this report tucked under their arm. There's a debate going on about it as we're sitting here talking. In the past, the EU has done lots to earn the criticism of being pro-Palestinian. I cannot believe, I'm very surprised actually, that it's had a report written that has been supposedly influenced by the Israelis in any way, shape or form. I can't talk for my 3 colleagues here, but I haven't seen any massive pro-Israeli bias start up in the course of the last 18 months in the European Parliament.
All right, let's have a quick show of hands around the table. Nigel Farage, in favour of publishing this report?
I completely understand why the report's not being published.
Why not?
Well, I think that the European Union did not want to appear to be provocative. I think they're very worried about the Hamas result last week. They're probably going to go on giving money to the Palestinian Authority. I mean, it was 380 million euros last year. So, I mean, they're playing big foreign policy games. And I think that's really the question. It's not a matter of transparency within the European Parliament. It's a matter that rapidly we have an emerging common foreign policy. And I mean, if you want to find out what Britain's position is on any global issue from Iran to the Middle East, please don't ask Jack Straw or Tony Blair or the British government.
Never mind
ask
Jack Straw or
Tony Blair.
Should this report be published formally?
Well,
yes or no?
On the basis,
Tick one box,
on the basis that it's been produced, yes.
Right. Silvana, yes or no?
Yes, it should absolutely be published. As Chris said, it's a matter of transparency, and that it's officially published, not only available to people if they look for it and through complicated ways then get it. And I think it's really also a question, how does the EU behave in international politics, because there often is a bias between the expectations of people outside the EU and reality that in the EU, that the EU is regarded as one player, and if it wants to be taken seriously, then it has to be very accountable and also very reliable of what it's doing. And I think to do a report and then not publish it, it's something that is actually not reliable then.
Good. What do you think the European Parliament's response to that should be?
Well, I think European Parliament should very, very closely look at how Hamas develops. I mean, it has been democratically elected. That's a fact now, with which we have to deal. And now we have to see how does Hamas really do politics. And we're in a quite strong position as EU there, because we're a big donator to the Palestinian authorities. And there we have a lot of ways of having pressure on on expecting them to behave in a way that negotiations can continue and that not further aggression comes up.
What happens? What happens if the bombings continue?
Well, firstly, I think we should be putting a ton of pressure on Hamas now to say they want to give up violence. I actually completely understand how Hamas got the vote they did, because they were a provider of care and protection in many of the communities in that particular geographic area where they got their strongest votes. So it's completely understandable why people voted for them and how we got this result. But now I think there's an opportunity for us to make sure that Hamas put down their weapons. They will need the money that's coming from Europe, from individual nation states, from America and around. This is probably the first point in time for a very long time that we actually have some pressure that we can apply to them.
Nigel Farage, isn't this a classic case of where actually having Europe speaking together with one voice, rather than as 10, 15, 25 individual states, really counts? We can put pressure on in a heavy context like the Middle East.
I would say that the European Union has in fact, unwittingly, but has directly contributed to Hamas's success. The fact that this 380 million euros a year has been given to the Palestinian Authority, no questions asked. I mean, never ever needed to see any evidence of how the money was spent. We know that that money contributed to the growth of corruption. That in itself was one of the major factors why Hamas did as well as they've done. So I don't think the EU comes out of this with any credit at all.
So would you cut off funding to the Palestinian Authority?
Yes,
completely?
Yes, I would, on the basis that we don't know how the money is being spent. And in the last Parliament, nearly 180 MEPs called for a special committee of inquiry into how that money was spent, and we were totally ignored.
Chris Davis, you'd like to come back on that one?
Well, the European Union could pave the streets of Europe with gold, and Nigel Farage would still find an excuse, perhaps because the pavements have suddenly become too slippery for complaining about it.
Transparency. We don't know how the money's being spent.
The reality is, the European Union, speaking with one voice, can be more powerful than 25 countries speaking separately. How we judge the existing situation? Well, we judge Hamas by its deeds, not by its words. I think that movement
its deeds so far are pretty horrific.
Exactly, but its deeds were those of a series of terrorists and bombers, combined, as Chris just said, with social workers. Now they've got to be administrators and negotiators. There will be huge tensions within that movement. That you can't judge them simply by the rhetoric coming out of certain people trying to keep a lid on it all. We have to judge them by their deeds from this point onwards.
Now to the EU budget, long the Achilles heel of the European Union. For the last 10 years, the Court of Auditors in Luxembourg has been unable to verify just how 110 billion, yes, 110 billion euros of it have been spent. A fact which confirms the worst suspicions of most Eurosceptics, that the EU is a gravy train whose passengers want anything but someone coming along and checking whether they've got a ticket. Chris Heaton-Harris, you're a strong proponent of the government not signing off the figures. What are you going to do on this one?
Well, 80% of the EU budget is spent on structural funds and on agricultural payments that are administered by member states, and they're not administered properly. I mean, the budget is a bit of a bizarre way.
It's the member states who are, if anybody is responsible for a lot of the money going AWOL, it's the member states, not Brussels.
No, not at all. The buck stops with Brussels, absolutely. And there's a commissioner who's in charge of the budget who should be, really policing. In fact, there's one in charge of budgetary control now because of a reform that we've driven through the Parliament. But it's there is a problem with the system. The IT system is not capable of actually checking where the money goes. There's no audit trail that's running properly. They still don't use double entry bookkeeping in most of their budgetary accounts. There are fundamental flaws in the accounting system, which is why money goes missing. And then it goes to the member states who don't give a toss where European money goes anyway.
So the question that's going to come up in the next session is, should individual ministers in member states start accepting some responsibility for all this? Yes or no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Nigel Farage.
Well, wonderful stuff, isn't it? I mean, this is the blame game, isn't it? You know, they can't sort out their own backyard. Just look at the things that the European Union administers itself. The Committee of the Regions, the foreign aid budget. We know it's a complete horlicks. I mean, I wouldn't let them run a bath, this lot, let alone run a big budget, and all they're trying to do is to shift the blame. Now, we understand, although repeatedly in your committee, the commissioners are asked which are the countries that are the chief offenders. They refuse to give us an answer. We understand that it's the Club Med countries who operate things very differently to the Northern European countries. But doesn't this get to the root of why this is never going to be reformed, it's never going to be changed to suit British standards? Because when it comes to money, when it comes to government spending, the attitudes of the British and the Italians are entirely
All right,
different.
well, just for a moment, rather than banging on about the UK leaving Europe and so on, how would you change the current system to improve it?
I believe, from a UK perspective, that our government has a duty of care to the British taxpayer to ensure that it's paying money into a system that actually works. At the moment it doesn't.
Now, how would you change the current system?
Well, if we stopped putting money into the European Union budget, that would refocus minds and we might get a better way of doing it. But the real answer, of course, is to give the European Union power and authority over the member states' control of that money. And to do that, I mean, that would work, and Chris would support that, but I think that would be politically unacceptable.
Chris Davis.
Everyone is corrupt. Everyone is a villain, except Nigel Farage and his friends. It's always the way. I think we have to recognise that.
I believe you were being ironic.
Thank you very much. Awfully good of you.
Huge reforms are taking place and have taken place. I mean, no one has mentioned the fact that the budgeting system, the accounting system, has been dramatically overhauled in the past year, and it could well be under the pressure of Parliament, of the press, that actually now the European Union's budget is probably under better scrutiny than that in any national parliament, in any national government. But yes, of course, individuals should take responsibility for the departments they run and for where the money is spent. Commissioners should take this personal responsibility for the money of their departments, and chancellors, Gordon Brown, finance ministers across Europe, should take responsibility each year for the money spent through their departments.
See, what I'm not hearing here, as a taxpayer, is what are you doing about the fact that 110 billion euros of my money goes unaccounted for? It's all committees and the software isn't right. Nobody's actually sort of saying, well, we're going to nail it.
Actually, no, that figure's nonsense. I mean, where do you get that from? We're talking about almost the entire EU budget here. I mean,
there's only a fraction of it that they seem to be able to sign off.
That's almost the amount of money of the total budget, 80% of which is spent by Gordon Brown and the other finance ministers. They're the ones who are first in the firing line. They must take responsibility for how that money is spent in each country, and national parliaments should be responsible for keeping them on the toes.
But there's been no appetite at all for change in this place. I mean, Marta Andreasen was lambasted by Chris's party, by the Socialists, by everyone all around. You know, I think the European Commission's first briefing, and when she actually blew the whistle, was that she's mad. She's a complete mad woman. You can't have anything to do with her. What actually turns up was the Commission's old internal auditor was saying exactly the same thing. The system was bust, but no one wanted to reform it. So it's
been reformed.
I know, but since that time,
you know it's been reformed, and yet you still criticise the fact that it's not being reformed.
The proposal that's going to be in front of you.
signed off. I mean, this is pure fact.
And they won't be signed off so long as Gordon Brown and his friends won't take responsibility for the money.
There are absolutely no benchmarks, department by department, so you don't know how money's being spent in each one. There's no way of testing whether things getting better or not, and the Commission will not answer any of the points.
Are we
That's not true. I mean, the Court of Auditors was able to give a declaration of that accounts were correctly done for the part that the EU institutions are spending themselves. The problem is with the money which is spent by the member states, and I think it should be really a precondition for Parliament to agree to the new financial perspective for the next few years, that actually the national authorities and that's the finance ministers take the responsibility for it. And I think it's also important to establish transparency. The EU Commission also, this is a new reform and a very good one, I think, is that they will publish on a website the recipients of EU subsidies which are directly while benefiting from subsidies by the EU. And they ask member states to establish the same transparency, but it's up to the member states to decide. And I think every national finance minister should do that. I mean, that's how you got to know that in the UK, Charles and Camilla get huge agricultural subsidies of the EU. I mean, if that wouldn't have been published, well, the British taxpayer wouldn't know that actually it's another British rebate coming to some, at least, citizens in the UK. And then Last point, I think the budgetary control unit, OLAF, of the EU should be allowed to investigate there where EU money is spent and shouldn't leave it to the national authorities, because, after all, it's EU money which is spent, and so they should, from an EU point, control.
There's a bit of a problem there, because OLAF, which is the anti-fraud office of the European Union, is situated in the budgets DG of the European Commission, so it's got to be independent.
Another point for reform, but I think that's an important one.
All right, let's have a quick vote on this one. That effectively, the proposal is going to be that finance ministers in member states have, as it were, to sign up and accept their own responsibility. For it or against it?
For it.
For
Yes, Gordon Brown and his friends should sign the pledge.
For it or against
For
it?
it, but it would never happen.
For it or against it?
No, I'm against it. I'm against British taxpayers pouring money into this corrupt club at all.
OK, we'll take a break there. Still to come, the Cyprus problems.
There's one magazine on the Brussels scene which is getting people all worked up. One magazine which reports on the EU but doesn't take EU money. One magazine which is read by the boys, both in Westminster and in Brussels. One magazine which is constantly under fire for writing the truth about EU politicians, which is funny and informative. The Sprout.
It's bang on.
The essence of everything that we really care about is defined by doing the very best possible job for a client, and we try to come fresh day to day with new ideas for our clients. And I think we have a track record of doing that because we've kept so many client relationships for such a long time.
Welcome back. Cyprus has been a political knot that neither the United Nations or Washington or London, for that matter, have been able to untie for over 30 years. But now there's talk of a breakthrough after Turkey proposed reviving talks on reunification and offered to lift trade restrictions. But on the ground, Greek Cypriots still want compensation for lost properties and more protection for their elderly relatives stuck in the north. We have this report from Martin Jay.
With Turkey negotiating its entry into the European Union, Brussels finally has to focus its attention to the problems of Cyprus, one of its newest member states. The Turkish army invaded northern Cyprus over 30 years ago, driving 200,000 Greek Cypriots from their homes and farms, leaving a further 20,000 marooned behind Turkish lines. In one such enclaved village in the north, Yanula Vasiliou, a 69-year-old former teacher, is one of the last 400 to still live on her own farm, despite losing 3/4 of her land. Most of her Greek Cypriot neighbours in the Carpathian Peninsula, and even her children, were forced to go south, and now dare not come home, despite the opening of the crossing points 2 years ago.
A lot of them like to come back, but all the houses are taken from Turkish.
Turkey's road to Brussels now passes through Cyprus, and key figures in the negotiations like EU Commissioner Olli Rehn are now confident that a new aid and trade deal for Cyprus is close to resolving the island's long dispute.
I hope that they will be adopted without delay, and I'm reasonably confident that the aid regulation could be adopted rather soon.
The optimism is felt in Nicosia too. But is a deal between Cyprus and Turkey realistic in the 12-month time span talked about in Brussels? Ambassador Erato Kazuku Makuli believes it is, but human rights must be at the centre of any new agreement with Turkey.
And this time around we want Brussels to be more active, to ensure that a solution that will be reached will be compatible with the acquis communautaire, will be compatible with the principles of the European Union. So it is very important to have a moratorium imposed on this issue of the properties, as well as the issue of the human rights of the enclave people. A lot can be done, and I think that the European Union has an obligation. These people are EU citizens, and it is totally unacceptable that they continue to live under these conditions.
But the 80,000 Turkish Cypriots in the north are also enclaved. A minority in their own land, they are also EU citizens, but subject to Turkish military rule. Sevgu Uludag, a respected author, thinks her people have become Ankara's hostages in the negotiations with Brussels, and is sceptical of the EU's commitment to Turkish Cypriots.
What I'm implying is, where is the responsibility of Europe? Because I'm a European citizen now, and my human rights and my freedom of expression is sometimes in danger, and Europe is not doing anything for me.
But time is running out for Yanula and her generation. She stayed behind to protect the house her father built and to educate a new generation of Greek Cypriot children in northern Cyprus. The price she paid was to send her children south to the Greek Cypriot side, a decision which now means she sees her own children only one day a month. One son comes to visit at twilight to avoid trouble with the Turkish authorities. She has few visitors, most are too afraid. Clinging to the last traces of Greek Cypriot heritage in the prison of northern Cyprus, she has little hope for change.
I think that the Turks are waiting the last generation of Greeks to die and take their property.
Martin J. reporting there. Nigel Farage, are all the people of Cyprus equal in the eyes of Brussels?
It's a very good question, one to which I'm not quite sure of the answer. I mean, clearly the answer is no, but just what are we doing with this problem? I mean, it's interesting, you know, everybody around here supported the last big wave of enlargement of the European Union. Seems to be remarkably stupid that it's as if we're enlarging the European Union, taking on very difficult, virtually intractable problems like Cyprus when we didn't need to do it. So I think it's very foolish of the EU to have got involved. I don't believe there's any particular...
Well, we're in, there's no doubt.
I don't believe there's any particular reason to believe that Olli Rehn's trade and aid deal is going to have any more success than any previous efforts with the UN or anybody else, and it's already, in fact, the Greek Cypriots have already said that they're not really going to accept it. So we've picked up, the EU has picked up a very big, difficult problem, and I'm afraid this dispute will go on and on.
Chris Davis, this is something you've been following for some years now.
Yes.
It seems at the moment that the Greek Cypriots want, if you like, a unitary state with minority Turks and the whole thing under an EU umbrella. The Turks want more of a United Nations solution. Which one of those is better?
Well, in theory, they both want a federal and an island, a unitary island with two separate halves with their own governments for those particular areas. In practice, though, the problem is the Cyprus problem is just a morass. We should never have taken Cyprus in as a divided island. The Greek Cypriots screwed us. They lied to us and they tricked us until the last minute. And now they're sitting around the table in the European Union, at the foreign ministers' table, blocking the rest of the European Union giving aid and assistance to the rest of the Turkish Cypriots.
I mean, it's all very well saying we shouldn't be starting from here.
I know.
We are where we are.
Well,
what's the way out?
Well, to some extent, Nigel's got a point here. There isn't a way out. It's not clear at all. The hope is that because Turkey ultimately controls North Cyprus, and Turkey has a vested interest in trying to negotiate its entry into the European Union, then Turkey will pull the strings. But the Turkish Cypriots should not have to kowtow to the Greek Cypriots. Their case as individuals, as Cypriots, is just as good as the Greek side.
Chris, why did you vote for enlargement then?
Well, I didn't vote for the Cyprus joining.
You did?
No, I didn't. I abstained on it because I've known that situation. I've been following it for years, and I just felt that when the Greek Cypriots voted against the United Nations plan, when the Turkish Cypriots did, then the whole situation had been turned on its head, and all the promises that had been made to us by Greek Cypriots had been betrayed.
All right, Chris Heaton-Harris, a way forward out of this mess.
Don't look at me. The UN can't do it, the European Union can't do it, individual member states can't do it.
You are parliamentarians. You are parliamentarians here in Brussels, at the centre of Europe. Whether we like it or not, this one is on the desk of the EU. I'm not hearing a constructive suggestion from anybody.
I think that's exactly what you say. It's on our desk, so it's no longer foreign policy. It's in a way EU domestic policy. And I think this is also part of the solution, even for somebody who wants a quick solution. solution that's very frustrating.
I'm not asking for a quick solution, I'm asking for a solution at all.
I think the part of the solution is that as it's now on our table, as we have to deal with it, there's much more focus on it and there's much more public attention to it. Because, I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, who was talking about Cyprus, honestly? Maybe some people who had a special interest, but now it's really an issue every day. And so in Cyprus, people are becoming more concerned. In Turkey, in EU member countries, and then through talking, through negotiation, in long term, I think there'll be a solution possible, much more likely possible than if it's left on its own and we just kind of say, not our business, we don't deal with it.
For the European Union, it's catch-22 at every turn, because the Greek Cypriots have that vote, have that blocking vote in the Council of Ministers. Britain is probably best placed to do something about it. Huge amounts of Cypriot income comes from British tourists. We're the biggest source of revenue. If the government wished to use its propaganda machine to discourage people travelling to Cyprus within the EU rules, then that would be a lever. But it would also encounter massive, of course, protests from Greek Cypriots, because we are the former colonial power. It would be seen like us trying to re-establish our authority, and it would, you just don't know where it would end.
The bigger question is, how does all this impact on Turkey's membership, and how should it impact on Turkey's membership? Chris Heaton.
Well, I mean, should Turkey join the European Union is another question that comes before that. Great, we're having negotiations with Turkey. I do not know if the negotiators are saying, actually, we want you to be much more agreeable and try and sort out a solution, or help sort out a solution with the Turkish Cypriots, and try and have a liaison with the Greek Cypriot community. Knowing the interest that there is in, fortunately not in my constituency, but in the London constituency in the UK, where actually the Greek and the Turkish Cypriots control huge segments of all political parties because they join up en masse to push these views across. I just cannot see a solution happening in quick order at all. And Turkish influence on this, because of the vote that the Greek Cypriots had on the UN proposal, is diminished dramatically, because all the chips are now with the Greek Cypriots.
One of the issues, as far as Turkey joining, is human rights.
Yeah.
Cyprus, as part of the EU, we have human rights problems there. We just saw some of those human rights problems on that film.
Yeah, I'm not sure actually whether the different bits of the acquis for joining up were upheld in every application that came forward, and it'll be interesting when we have Romania and Bulgaria join. I think they won't have ticked all the boxes, but they'll still be members of the club in the not too distant future. It's I think this is a problem that's going to run and run and run.
Just remember, we're letting down the Turkish Cypriot administration. And Turkish Cypriots. Turkish Cypriots are EU citizens, as the film said. We don't recognise their administration. And yet, ironically, that administration is now pro-European Union.
I come back to the human rights issues, the human rights of the people on the island of Cyprus. What can you do to help them, as parliamentarians?
Well, we have to establish...
as a parliament.
We have to establish open relations with the administration elected by the European citizens who happen to be Turkish Cypriots. And that's not happening at the moment. And the reason it's not happening is because the Greek Cypriots block every move in that direction.
There's a new cross-party group being formed, hasn't there, to a contact group with Cyprus. So one of the researchers working on this programme called this contact group the other day, and they didn't even know where the airports are on Cyprus, which doesn't strike me as a terribly impressive start. Have you got any hopes for it?
No, I don't, because from the very moment this group was set up, there was a huge lobbying by the Greek Cypriots within this parliament, and I believe it's already been packed with people who are taking only one side of the argument.
Should Cyprus be resolved one way or another before Turkey joins? Never mind the timescale.
I have to say, I don't think Turkey will ever join the European Union. I think the massive opposition amongst the French population, the Austrian population, because of the immigration implications of Turkey joining is so great, I do not believe they will ever join the EU, Cyprus or not.
But one thing you can be absolutely certain of is that Turkey will not join so long as Cyprus remains divided. One way or another, that has to be part of the package.
Of course, we've got the Austrian presidency right now. How do we think the Austrian presidency is going to handle the Cyprus problem?
I think they're looking forward to shelving it for the next person who takes on the presidency in July.
Well, I think they're possibly more able to do something there as a non-colonial power. They have bigger credibility in that issue. So I think there could be a way forward with them. But I mean, Turkey joining the EU, of course, the Cyprus issue has to be solved beforehand, because it doesn't make sense otherwise. And immigration, I mean, Berlin is the fourth biggest Turkish city after Ankara, Istanbul and Izmir. We've got the biggest Turkish population there, and so we have that Turkish immigration in Germany as a reality. So this won't change much in that regard. But
so if there was a referendum in Germany, the German people would vote for Turkey to join, would they?
No.
No. Well, exactly. Yeah, there we are. Yeah.
All right, then, as members of the European Parliament, what would you say to individuals like the one that we saw in Martin Jay's film there, whose families are divided, who can't get, their children can't come and see them? This has been a situation which has been going on for decades. What hope can you hold out